Welcome to the Road to Accountable AI. I'm Kevin Werback, Professor of Legal Studies and Business Ethics at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. For decades, I've studied emerging technologies from broadband to blockchain. Today, artificial intelligence promises to transform our world. But AI won't reach its potential without accountability, mechanisms to ensure it's deployed in responsible, safe, and trustworthy ways. On this podcast, I speak with the experts leading the charge for accountable AI. Diya Wynn is the responsible AI lead at AWS, Amazon Web Services, which, as we talk about, is in an interesting position as both a company that uses a lot of AI itself internally and one that provides the cloud infrastructure for many other companies in their deployment of their own AI systems. We talk about how she works with customers and organizations to help them on their journey to being responsible in their use of AI. I hope you'll enjoy my conversation with Diya Wynn. Diya, welcome. You were, as I understand it, the first AI ethicist or responsible AI person at AWS. So how did you find your way into that kind of a role?
Well, I'd say first, formal titled in that context, but there were certainly other people before me doing work in other capacities in the organization focused on ethical and responsible AI. But specifically, that title and function was developed in our professional services organization. And interestingly enough, probably, I guess about 5 years ago, a little bit over 5 years ago, I started this internal campaign because I thought that we had an opportunity to be able to assess the tens of thousands, now hundreds of thousands of customers that we're building on top of our AI ML services. Assist them in the way that we do with our cloud. We have something called well architected, and it's a set of practices and a structure around pillars that give people the foundational information that they would need to build and take full advantage of the capacity and all the capabilities of the cloud. And my thought was that we have the benefit of our experience using AI and implementing that for Amazon in various capacities for a number of years. All of the expertise of the probably hundreds, thousands of data scientists that are helping to build our services and those that are working in research areas and like Amazon Science and our scholars, that we could bring all of that together in a way to be able to assist our customers with understanding the risk and having the best sort of insight to be able to address that. So we have this culture at Amazon, which is we call thinking big and writing a narrative, basically a proposal. And that's exactly what I did. So I wrote a narrative with the things that I believed were going to provide the best support for us to lean in and respond to our customers in this way. I will tell you at the time, we didn't have as much customer demand, and a lot of our innovation comes from our customers. This was a little bit more forward leaning or forward thinking in that we were seeing some increased conversations around the need for ethical AI. That was the term at the time, and felt like we have an opportunity to be able to lean in and provide support and assistance for our customers, given our expertise and all of the knowledge. So it took a little bit to find the right organization internally that would sponsor the work, but I started our first customer facing practice on responsible AI, and that's sort of where that all began.
So how do you work with customers? As I assume they've got their own initiatives and their own business needs, and AWS is the cloud provider that they're using. What are the kinds of issues that you get into with them?
So it varies. One is we'd have customers that would be looking for some sort of guidance. They had some familiarity or awareness of this need for responsible AI or ethical AI. They wanted to understand what we were doing internally in the company. And so that would be an inquiry that they made through their sales team or other folks on their account team. Sometimes it was directly with our professional services resources where they saw an opportunity that they believed would be best suited for us to be engaged. I would venture to say at the beginning, there was some discretion. Like, is this a use case that we should have some other oversight in or some other support with? And then there would be some outreach for us from our perspective in the initial stages where we were looking at customers in certain industries that we felt would be much more amenable to these conversations around responsible AI. I've made a bit of a pivot in terms of that initial structure. And certainly what we've seen over the course of the last year or so helped to make that pivot and shift as well. Because one, my firm belief is that there shouldn't be any AI without responsible AI, without the accountability and the intentional focus on understanding risk and seeking to mitigate those and address those. But what happened with the generative AI now being in the hands of so many individuals and some of its public challenges, or the challenges that were made public, that's helped others to now seek out much more our assistance and understanding of how we can be much more diligent in our work and what things they can do to protect their data. And so our work would be educational, just in terms of general awareness. One person may know or have some context and wants to make sure that they can expand that to their entire team. The other would be strategic advisory and then implementation support. So those were the three broad areas that we would end up engaging with customers, as well as helping them understand what we were doing as an organization and our commitment to responsible AI so they have some context for what are we seeing, what are we doing, and then how do we step in and do this as well.
Yeah, could you say a little bit more about that? How does the internal work of AI accountability or responsibility in AWS and Amazon relate to what you do engaging with customers?
Yeah, so very much related. We have established a four-part strategy in order to drive our commitment to responsible AI and institutionalize that in the organization. And that four-part strategy looks like one helping, well, I often start off with one that is later, like in the context of our slides, but it's having a people-centered focus. And that people-centric focus or approach helps us extend beyond just looking at technology, but also incorporating people, process, and culture to help make the shift so that responsible AI becomes an integral part of the culture. It also means that we are committing to doing the work that's necessary given our understanding of the risks and the ways in which that it can affect marginalized and underserved populations or underrepresented populations, that we increase the value in building diverse teams, incorporating their voice and perspective into how we're establishing and developing partner products to ensure that they're fair and inclusive. So that looks like us investing in scholarship programs, our machine learning course, a partnership with HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions in order to provide education. And then we have something like our AI Ready program that, or initiative that where we committed to training 29 million individuals in AI by the year 2025. Then the other part of this strategy is taking a holistic approach to building our AI services responsibly. And so that's incorporating responsible AI into every aspect of the machine learning lifecycle, from how we make decisions about the technology at the leadership level into design, development, and deploying, as well as ongoing use. And that kind of goes along with the idea that we don't want responsible AI to be a separate work stream, but integrated into the way that we build our services and ultimately how we're doing our business. Then it is helping our customer transform responsible AI from theory to practice. And that's essentially what we do, or part of what we do. My teams, that were customer facing, as well as other teams in the organization. It is our ability to be able to give guidance as well as resources and tooling to be able to incorporate responsible AI into their practice, essentially operationalizing responsible AI. So that may be the team of responsible AI practitioners and consultants or experts that will come to partner with our customers to provide education as well as awareness and as well as support as far as how they're implementing specific services, like helping them understand how to detect bias with something like SageMaker Clarify, or looking at privacy preserving techniques. And then the last bit of this is our ongoing investment in responsible AI research, advancing the science of responsible AI. And that's important because there's still challenges or areas where we don't have all of the answers to. We're constantly innovating, and technology is also advancing at a rapid pace. But it requires this sort of constant evolution and expanding and advancing the science to stay up with that, but also to find new novel approaches to some of the challenges and be able to take that ongoing research and innovation into how we're building and ultimately the kind of investment, support, and assistance that we're giving to our customers. So that looks like some of our integration with National Science Foundation, and we have a Fairness in AI grants program where we've invested $20 million, strategic partnerships with California Institute of Technology, as well as engaging in standards bodies, et cetera. So that is the kind of insight that helps to inform, again, the work that we're doing in terms of building our services, but also what we're doing in terms of providing support and assistance to our customers. And so that's the
A
overall
lot.
strategy that gets helps drive all of the internal work in the organization.
You mentioned the evolution in the increase you're getting from companies. I'm curious how much at this point, when you're working with customers, is okay, here's the template. If you want to be responsible AI, you've got to do the following 8 things and just check them off, versus really having to be more of a bespoke conversation and distinctive kinds of issues they're facing.
Well, so we tried to develop a structure. So in terms of helping us guide like conversations and engagement with customers, because I mean, just like you've seen pillars and pillars of responsible AI or principles that different organizations have established, all of those that provide a framework for being able to unpack where there are areas of risk and to help us be intentional in considering who's incorporated and how we're building the system and addressing the proposed risks. So that structure for us is really what helps us guide the conversation, but it does end up being somewhat bespoke in the sense that not every customer is at the same degree of maturity and their needs might be different. So we've had an opportunity to sit with a customer who was at the very early stages. That conversation or engagement with them was one just focus on like training and education. What do we do to help our teams and developers understand our commitment to responsible AI, our commitment to AI overall? And that was in part like building out a set of a learning sort of path and strategy for how we incorporate general responsible or general AI training into the organization so that they understand commitment, somewhat like some of the compliance, security compliance and information security kind of training, but then also equipping people at different stages of their product development cycle with knowledge and understanding of what they should be thinking about and how. And then it was also like helping them develop their own set of tenets or or guardrails for what responsible AI looked like for them in their organization. And again, that sort of baseline work happens with some organizations, and then others. We had a customer that came to us that had already created their own principles and had a certain structure. They really wanted to now get into tools and wanted to understand what things do we have available that could help support them in that. Unfortunately, in our early stages, we had, I'd say, probably a handful is not accurate. There are a number of different tools because there are things that we're doing in ML ops that support different areas of responsible AI as well, in terms of its automation or being able to look at performance and measure, right? But then also adding on additional capability, like the things that have evolved with our being able to establish model cards in SageMaker, detect for bias and have explainability. Those are additional tools that now are services that now round out a good, I think, robust set of services that help support customers as they're implementing.
Let me drill down on that issue of bias and fairness. As you say, there are a variety of tools out there where you can do an analysis, look at your training data, look at your model performance and so forth. But how far along do you think we are in terms of organizations really seriously and effectively addressing that challenge?
So this is, I think it's twofold. I think you're absolutely right. We have tools that are helping organizations understand bias in their algorithms and or their data themselves. There's an element of this, and I remember I think it was a 2019 AI Now study that said the problem with or the challenge with AI systems where is a diversity problem, right? That essentially, some of that challenge is because of the lack of diversity, the lack of those that are underrepresented to see and help evaluate the data differently or to help provide a different perspective as we're evaluating some of our challenges. So I think that's one element of it. But the part that I wanted to get to in particular was around the notion that we as human beings have bias, right? And we're the ones building the systems. But that actually wasn't the AI Now study. That was something that came out of Gartner that said 85% of the projects up till I think with 2023 would have erroneous outcomes due to bias in the people themselves, bias in the data, as well as in the algorithms. And so we've got to be able to address or look at ways to be able to tackle all of those. How do we address challenges with the bias that we bring to a problem in the way that we design a system? That the diversity helps to support that, but then also understanding that and then putting in systems and structure, right, and process so that we can hopefully unpack and eliminate our own individual bias and have a much more objective view as we are evaluating things. A- And so I would say that I think we're taking steps in the right direction. The tools are essential, right, to being able to support us in that process. The process is necessary as well as us being coming in alignment and seeing the value and importance of doing that kind of work and making sure that we're considering the voice and perspective of those so that we can eliminate areas of bias. And then there's this bit where we likely will have bias at some level in systems all the time. And what do we do in terms of making different decisions given the context and awareness of bias in our data, perhaps, right? Or systemic and institutional bias that might be infiltrated? How do we then evaluate how we're releasing a product? What does that look like in deployment? And those are conversations that we're starting to have a lot more because of this sort of move and direction. I think those are all good things that are getting us further along.
What do those conversations look like? Or you probably can't give a specific example with a particular company, but you posed a bunch of really good questions there about things to think about. But how do you help a customer actually work through what they need to do for bias awareness?
Yeah. So I'll talk through the framework a little bit. And we often start off with value alignment in terms of like how well is this specific use case that we're considering aligned to our values with the output of such infringe on or not be in alignment with our values. I've used this example a lot, but I think it's one of the best ones to articulate this. And this was with someone who was responsible for serving a certain population and gaining information or intelligence from calls could mean that they violated their core tenets in terms of their ideals or their mission, right? And so for us, it was more of a question of like, how would this use case align with your core values? Does this support your mission, vision, values, any of the things that are regulatory, et cetera, that you have to comply with? Then it's about inclusion. And one of the things that we do when we talk about inclusion is not just do we have diversity at the table, because that's often been a challenge in terms of bringing in resources broadly, organizations. We still are struggling with that. But how do we bring in that voice and perspective? And so a couple of the things that we would use is certainly like looking at personas and identifying those. Are we considering all stakeholders, not just 80% of them? And then also looking at have we thought about anti-personas? Who do we intend not to serve? Because that's often where unintended impact occurs. And so that would be another opportunity for us to think about and consider like, we actually mean this for this particular population and we don't want to harm others, even though we're not considering them one of our primary customers. Then it's looking at things around training and education. How are we equipping those that are responsible for building the systems or any part of the product lifecycle with the knowledge and awareness that they need to know, as well as what do we do in an organization where we might be introducing systems that have to be integrated into work and augment the workforce? Or what responsibility does that organization have to consider those things? And that will also then step through the other areas of the process. And I know I won't go into all of those, but then transparency, accountability is one. Like, are we thinking about roles and responsibilities? Who will help us understand what are the next steps to take? How do we look at the specific use case, understand its risk and impact, and then have the appropriate human oversight as necessary? Transparency and explainability. Then we look at privacy, security, and safety, and of course, fairness, right? And the fairness is the technical sort of approach to ensuring that we have the appropriate behaviors that we want across the system consistently, irrespective of any subgroup or demographic. And that element is important for us to be able to define at the beginning, because making this sort of commitment to building responsibility responsibly requires that we think about this in design, right? And not just as an afterthought. Like, after we've designed the system, then we try to run some tests and look at everyone's scores and hope that we've got the right result. It's ultimately like defining what is fair for this particular use case and having that integrate throughout the entire system is the goal.
What exactly does it look like in concrete terms to design in fairness from the beginning of the process? What are the things that an organization would need to do in order to achieve that?
Right. It's actually thinking about, so it's in part like thinking about the customers that we want to serve, but it's also thinking about what would be an appropriate outcome that's going to meet the needs of both or all demographics. So if I am building something that we want to make sure is providing benefit or service to an aging population, right? Making sure that we're irrespective, if it's supposed to support people of a certain age, right? So we're going to say seniors, for instance. I've been dealing with that quite a bit with my family. So with my aging father, but looking at like a specific service is going to benefit them, then we would want to also say, well, aging has some cross sections, right? The aging population has some cross sections. Do we consider what that performance might look like for people who are aging across different demographics? How do we think about people who have different, who might be a different ability, right? Or might be disabled? They're still part of the aging population. And so we have to look at those cross sections as well, and then define what would be the appropriate system outcome, right? Across those, so that we're defining that and then integrating that into how we build the design. So at the end, if our system is not actually producing the right outcome that we've defined here, then we get to reevaluate that or make determinations about, well, again, did we meet the measure and fulfill the requirements ultimately desired for the system?
So let me pull back a bit. How do you define success when you're working with a customer?
So, and it will depend on what we're actually doing, right? So, in the context of something that is educational, it's looking at over time the percentage of individuals that we've reached in terms of educational content and how that's informed the work that they do, right? So, that's fairly standard. And when I say inform, right, if we are helping the developers now use tools that are helping with detecting bias, since we were just talking about that. How many of them are actually using that now, using those tools and making them an active part of their job or responsibility versus just occasionally using it or not using it at all? What percentage of those are now adopting the tools that are going to help benefit them? So that could be one, right, from an education perspective. But if it's something strategic, it's actually looking at how well we've defined the principles or tenets that they might be leveraging, how those get integrated into the organization, looking at a bit of a sort of organizational change management process of how that gets implemented and creating measures across the board. With implementation and with it's going to be something much more technical, if we're again talking about bias, actually measuring before and after in terms of a process. If we are now reevaluating a system that might have been already functioning, and then what that looks like in the end, because now we're introducing bias detection tools and mitigation techniques, ultimately is ensuring that when we look to address issues of risk, that those risks have been mitigated and we have a way to be able to track those.
And you've been doing this for, as you said, a number of years now. Are there mistakes along the way that you've learned from? or ways that you've evolved the way that you think about doing this kind of work?
Absolutely. I think though one of the first things that come to mind is when we first started this, ethical AI was the conversation du jour. And while there was a lot in marketplace in terms of ethical AI, when we got into conversations or when we were trying to approach customers, that actually was a bit of a turnoff in some ways, right? There was sometimes a visceral reaction to the idea that ethical, like we were passing judgment or making some assertion about their moral values, et cetera, because of a particular use case. And that's not actually the role that we wanted to take. So we pivoted early from conversations around ethical AI to responsible AI. I think our outcomes are still ultimately the same. And we've used a number of these terms interchangeably, but it meant for us being able to meet our customers at a different place and remove some of the initial resistance that might have occurred or did occur in some cases that we could have a conversation. This notion of responsible AI is very much, or responsibility is also very much in alignment with discussions that we have from the cloud perspective. We have a responsibility model, and people understand that there's a role that we have as far as providers of technology, but there's a role the customer has as well as the builder and deployer of that technology. And so this conversation around responsible AI was certainly one that I think was much more amenable to our customers, but also gave us an opportunity to meet them much more where they are. I think the other is to think that we could mitigate, we could like have this grand set of tenants and this framework, and perhaps that everyone would take all of those and start to integrate them fully. And and understanding where people were in terms of their maturity was important. So we had some customers initially that may have only done something around education awareness and didn't necessarily step into like using every tool or service and addressing all of these pieces, but that understanding that this is a journey. There are none of us that have, I think, arrived fully and have addressed everything that we can, but that we're making steps in the right direction. And so, depending on where that organization is, as far as their maturity and use of AI and deploying those things into production, will dictate in some ways what they take on as far as the principles. And we had to certainly adjust our perspective about that because I would love that everyone would do all of the things, right? But that's not a reality. And I think the other is just recognizing that there are those trade offs that we make with how much we're investing in responsible AI and where that slows us down or and what we can prioritize given timeframes is very real. And we've had to certainly help figure out where it makes sense to invest given a certain use case, and others perhaps not so because you had these competing business priorities.
One thing that's also changed is now there's this flood of either regulation or frameworks or proposed obligations and laws that are relevant to AI and responsible AI. Does that make your job easier or harder?
I think it makes it harder. Well, actually, I think it makes it easier. I'm going to say that in the sense that where our initial start with responsible AI was in some ways relying on people's will and good desire to do good to incorporate these principles and to develop these practices internally. And while there are customers and companies for sure that are committed to doing good and not doing harm, again, that business prioritization and the lack of necessity to necessarily invest could help or could allow them to deprioritize some of those areas of focus. And what legislation and some of the standards now has done is elevate the importance of these beyond just one organization or a few advocates making this demand, but seeing it across in government or, White House, executive order, et cetera. Um, but it's also adding the reinforcement, right? Or we'll have some of that reinforcement where it's a requirement now and we can't ignore it. It really is a business imperative. And, and these areas are drawing people to much more to the conversation.
And so last thing is, what are you focused on going forward? Or what do you think are the greatest challenges in the next few years for organizations trying to think about responsibility around AI?
Well, that is who knows what's going to happen in the next few years. But I'll tell you what I think about a lot, and it's an area of excitement. In one sense, the great opportunity that we have with AI. In some ways, we are looking at technology and an opportunity for us to hopefully create more equitable experiences and access, right? That is a hope. It requires a lot of intentional focus from organizations uh, to build in these practices, to make that integral in the way that they're not just designing, but also deploying these systems. I think the other thing is just to be conscious and aware of while technology has the ability to do a lot of things, something we probably should keep off limits, right? And how do we balance that? Because there's such excitement and consideration for all of the things that it can do. But I think that there are some things that it probably shouldn't do. And us still balancing this great opportunity, all that the advancement of technology can bring while preserving humanity.
All right. Well, that's an encouraging, challenging, but overall positive way to wrap up. Diya, thank you so much for joining me on the road to accountable AI.
Thank you as well for having me.
This has been the road to accountable AI. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a good review and check out my Substack for more insights on AI accountability. Thank you for listening.